These biblical figures share aspects of their life stories, from threatened childhood to passing through Egypt, isolation before assuming their mission, and the number 40. A desperate mother puts her baby in a basket and lets him float down the Nile, Egypt's great river, trusting that the sometimes treacherous waters will have more mercy than men. There is an order to kill all Jewish babies, and that child is one of them. Years later, another little boy is taken to Egypt by his parents, fleeing the threat of a king who fears losing the throne and has also ordered the extermination of children under 2 years of age. Both survive a massacre ordered by the power of the day. Both grow to change history. Moses and Jesus did not live in the same century, but the narrative coincidences between their lives have fascinated theologians, historians, and writers for more than 2 millennia. The Bible presents them as foundational figures. One leads his people out of slavery in Egypt, the other, according to Christian tradition, offers universal spiritual liberation. Their stories are intertwined like narrative mirrors, but they also reveal profound differences that place them on different planes. The story of Moses begins with an act of desperation. Pharaoh has ordered the killing of all newborn Hebrew males, fearful that the slaves will become a threat. In the midst of that decree, a woman from the tribe of Levi hides her son for 3 months. Then, with no other way out, he places it in a basket and leaves it in the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter finds him, takes pity on him, and raises him as if he were her own. Centuries later, in Bethlehem, a monarch also feels threatened by the arrival of a child. Herod, king of Judea, hears rumors that the king of the Jews has been born. He orders a massacre of children. Joseph, warned in a dream, flees with Mary and the little Jesus to Egypt. They stayed there until the king's death. In both stories, childhood is marked by persecution and flight. Both survive by the determined action of their fathers and mothers and live, Jesus, for a few years, as children in Egypt. At that point, their lives begin to run in parallel. Moses grows up as a prince, even though he is Hebrew. His youth is marked by a conflict of identity. He lives among Egyptian privileges, but feels that he does not belong to that culture. When he sees a foreman beating a Hebrew slave, he kills him and flees into the desert. There, in Midian, he married and became a shepherd. Jesus, on the other hand, grows up in humble Nazareth, the son of a carpenter. Little is known about his youth, except for an episode in which he stays in the Temple of Jerusalem, arguing with the wise men at the age of 12. Unlike Moses, he is not educated in palaces or trained as a prince. His life takes place on the periphery, among peasants and artisans. But both go through a stage of retirement and transformation before starting their public mission. Moses meets God in the form of a burning bush while tending sheep. Jesus, after being baptized, retires to the desert for 40 days, where he is tempted by the devil. That number, 40, appears in both stories as a symbol of preparation. In the Bible, the number 40 is not accidental. It is a symbolically laden figure that appears repeatedly in contexts of trial, transition, or revelation. In Moses' life, 40 years mark his sojourn in the wilderness of Midian before he is called by God. Later, he will lead the Israelite people for another 40 years in the desert, on the way to the Promised Land. Jesus, at the beginning of his public life, withdrew for 40 days into the desert, where he faced temptations. The parallel is clear. Both characters go through a stage of isolation before taking on their mission. In both cases, the desert is not only a geographical place, but a space of transformation. For the Hebrews, the 40 years represented the purification of an enslaved generation, unable to fully believe in the promise. For Jesus, the 40 days were a spiritual preparation, a foretaste of trials to come. The length, setting, and meaning of both episodes underscore the idea that there is no revelation without proof. Moses climbs Mount Sinai and descends with the tablets of the law. It is a foundational moment for the people of Israel. From then on, the covenant with God is governed by a code, a set of norms that structure religious and civil life. Jesus also climbs a mountain and gives a speech that will mark his followers. The Sermon on the Mount, according to the Gospel of Matthew, begins with the Beatitudes and continues with a reinterpretation of the Mosaic Law. You have heard that it was said, but I tell you, he repeats over and over again. If Moses brings the law, Jesus proposes a new reading of that law. It does not annul it, according to the text itself, but it brings it to its fullness. Justice ceases to be only compliance with rules and becomes a matter of the heart. One of the most significant points in the comparison is the notion of alliance. Moses is the mediator of the first covenant between God and the people of Israel, sealed on Mount Sinai with the giving of the Ten Commandments. This alliance defines Israel as a nation and establishes a legal, religious, and ethical framework. Jesus, according to Christian tradition, inaugurates a new covenant, which is no longer based on the written law but on faith. During the Last Supper, he takes the cup and says, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you." Luke 22 verse 20. It is a radical statement. The relationship between God and men is redefined through sacrifice, not law. To the early Christians, especially in Paul's texts, Jesus is seen as the fulfillment of what Moses anticipated. While Moses intercedes for a specific people, Jesus is presented as a universal mediator. Both characters are associated with miracles, although in different contexts. Moses, according to the book of Exodus, turns his staff into a serpent, brings plagues down on Egypt, parted the Red Sea, and made water gush out of a rock in the desert. His prodigies are acts of confrontation and liberation in the face of pharaonic power. Jesus, for his part, heals the blind, lepers and paralytics. He multiplies loaves and fishes, walks on water, and raises the dead. His miracles are not intended to punish an enemy, but to restore the human being. They do not aim for power, but for compassion. Both use signs to demonstrate divine authority, but the context reveals an important nuance. Those of Moses are linked to the construction of a people, those of Jesus, to the transformation of the individual. The clearest differences between the two emerge at the end of their lives. Moses, according to Deuteronomy, dies on the summit of Mount Nebo, seeing the promised land from afar, but unable to enter it. No one knows where he was buried. Jesus dies on the cross, executed by the Romans. He is buried, but his followers claim that he was resurrected on the third day. His death, more than an end, is presented as the beginning of a new stage. While the death of Moses closes a cycle, that of the Exodus and the formation of the people, Jesus' death inaugurates a new narrative that expands beyond the borders of Judaism. Were these similarities casual or intentionally constructed? Many scholars argue that the Gospel of Matthew, written for a Jewish audience, deliberately presents Jesus as a new Moses. From his birth to his teaching on the mountain, the parallels function as signposts for Torah-savvy readers. The figure of Moses was already central to Jewish identity. Presenting Jesus with similar traits not only legitimized him, but placed him within a continuum. At the same time, the differences mark a rupture. Jesus is not a political liberator, nor does he form a new state, nor does he dictate a civil law. Its message moves from the national to the universal level. Moses and Jesus, separated by centuries and contexts, share narrative structures that reflect common concerns: threatened childhood, divinely inspired leadership, moral teaching, spiritual mediation. But they also represent two different ways of understanding the relationship between the sacred and the human. One leads a people through the desert to a promised land. The other walks through crowds and speaks of a kingdom that is not of this world. Both left indelible marks.